Hey there, Stephen Hale here from The Banner, and I'm with my colleague Sarah Grace Taylor because we're going to talk about the legislature. How are you doing?
You know.
The first week is done. So I think first every one of these is someone's first, so it feels like to me we should make sure everyone knows how the legislature works. Bit like Congress, but for the state, there's a House, there's a Senate. There's way more Republicans than Democrats, and they can basically do whatever they want, whether the Democrats show up or not. Is that the gist of it?
I'm not going to say that part because I have to cover these people. But
what I mean is they have a supermajority. They could make laws. Democrats don't have the votes to stop them, so the Republicans are the one kind of setting the agenda in the state for the past, 10 years or more?
Yeah, since like 2012, I think it's been Republican controlled in every part of the state, so the governor as well as both houses. The Senate is rarely going to be where news happens because they're just so securely Republican. The House, securely Republican. Democrats can't do a ton, but there's a little more infighting with Republicans. So most of the time we talk about bills, we'll be talking about the House.
Interesting. And you have, I think, 4 stories up already because you wrote a preview, which people can check out on NashvilleBanner.com, and then a few more stories, including one that went up this morning because there was action yesterday. So, do you want to kind of try to sum up what's happened so far for us? Just first week, things that stand out, things you've noted in your reporting.
Yeah, I mean, kind of predictably, and to be clear, this is not the first week of a session. This is the first week of the second year of a 2-year session.
Yes.
So there's a lot of stuff that's going to be carryover from last year, and then there's a lot of new bills, and even the new bills are kind of carrying over themes from last year, right?
Yes.
So what we knew going in is that immigration was going to be the main issue, and what we saw this week is that House and Senate Republican leadership came with a big package of immigration bills that they wrote with the White House. That's definitely the big news out of the first week. But also there's some kind of carryover stuff. There's a drag bill that was passed in the House that would target drag shows. There's another slew of LGBTQIA issue bills that were introduced by a conservative to do things like banning pride flags in the state. And there's just kind of a lot of business as usual with this drumbeat of conversation of whether or not Bill Lee is going to end up trying to expand vouchers this year when it's a tight budget year, but the first chance to expand it.
Right. And so maybe we could break that down because, yes, I know immigration has been one of the big things that's come out the first few days. We were expecting it to be a big topic. It was a big topic last year when the legislature was in session. And there's already been a few bills that have kind of passed, or there's been some action on them, right, including yesterday. Do you want to tell us what happened yesterday? And then I know there's been a few other things, but what was the kind of activity yesterday on that?
Yeah, so nothing new in immigration has passed yet. Like, there hasn't been a lot of forward movement. And just to catch us up to where the ledge is categorically, they met this week. A lot of committees had their first meetings. There's a lot of presentations. But a lot of the bills are either entirely brand new because they were introduced right now, or they are bills that got kicked because they weren't quite ready last year. And so they move it to the first calendar of next year, which would have been this week or in the coming weeks. And so often the more complicated or controversial bills that were kicked because they were so complicated and controversial aren't ready yet. So basically there's not a lot of movement on bills except for that drag bill basically this week.
Yes, which we should come back to because that and the LGBT rights related bills, they can't seem to quit generating new versions of these things to debate every year. But on the immigration front, it's interesting to me because, as you mentioned, in the House that there can be sometimes more internal divides, and because of the divide between Republicans and Democrats, like when these bills are proposed by a Republican, if there's no internal debate amongst Republicans, it's likely to succeed, right? It's likely to get passed. Are there any of topics that you see so far coming where there might be internal disagreements within the Republican caucus, or are they kind of all on the same page, do you think, about what they want to do going forward as it relates to immigration policy?
There's nothing, so immigration policies that were introduced yesterday came from all of Republican leadership. So the majority leaders, the speaker, the lieutenant governor, they came and put this together, as well as some of the other sponsors of these bills. There were 8 different immigration bills introduced yesterday, plus there were a trickle that happened in the off time. But the 8 yesterday were the ones that were written with Stephen Miller. And it seemed unlikely to me that there will be significant pushback because they're so co-signed by all of the leadership. We'll get into what the bills are, but I would say like some of them, their likely hurdles are going to be legal challenges to the bills themselves, and it's not going to be that they get necessarily tied up in the legislature.
Got it.
And like, for example, and this kind of like catches us up to where we are with immigration, last year I wrote a ton about a bill that's carried by Majority Leader William Lamberth on the House side and Chattanooga Senator Bo Watson in the Senate. Passed the Senate, it would let local education authorities, whatever they're called, the school boards, the school boards would get to decide if they wanted to charge tuition to or disallow students who are undocumented from attending public schools, which opens up a big court fight because there's 1982 Plyler v. Doe court decision in the Supreme Court that says you can't do that. Undocumented migrants are entitled to public schools. This was like a huge fight. There were protests. It made it through committees when it wasn't clear that it would because of that infighting. And then it passed the Senate and is poised to pass in the House, but is still stuck in the Finance Committee because Lamberth basically had to pull it when it became clear that if he were to do this thing, even though he's cool with the Supreme Court challenge, because the Republicans are chomping at the bit for another one after winning the transgender youth bill.
I was going to say there's a few issues that they've taken this approach, right, where they kind of know that they're almost certainly going to be brought to the Supreme Court, but they want the fight on that. They want the legal fight on that issue. So
that bill got pulled by Lamberth because he just knew, like, I can't risk $1.1 billion in federal funding that the state receives by violating this. So he went to go get the clearance from the feds to carry that bill again this year, right? So that brings us to now, when they bring in this 8-bill thing yesterday, there's another school bill that kind of looks like it's to replace Lamberth's old bill, though they haven't said that explicitly. And this would just require schools to track undocumented students and verify status when people try to enroll in schools, which gets part of the purported financial goal of keeping undocumented students out of schools that the Republicans were pitching last year, while also letting them like kind of quietly come off of Lamberth's bill, which could jeopardize that money. So since they've yet to receive approval, which even yesterday when asked about squaring the two bills, they said, we don't know, we're still waiting to hear back. And I talked to Lamberth as recently as January, and he was saying, I don't know. He's been talking to the Department of Education, but hasn't gotten explicit confirmation that they won't pull funding. So they can't really pull the trigger on that bill. So what we saw yesterday were a bunch of like new criminal measures, a bunch of tracking measures, and a bunch of just efforts to identify who's undocumented, punish them where possible, and then punish governments, local governments that don't want to participate with what the state is doing. And that is very consistent with what they did in the special session last year and the regular session, but is like dialing up the intensity of their reaction to these immigration issues.
Got it. Did you get a sense while you were up there this week that any of the lawmakers or staff, other people that are kind of in the building up there as this was all getting started, were either keeping up with, reacting to everything that's going on in Minneapolis right now? Like, it just seemed overwhelming to me, the amount of information that's coming from there. Like, that's the dominant story online. But was that a topic of discussion with them? Or are they like keeping
Absolutely.
an eye on that?
So that was the second thing that came up on the House floor. They start every floor session with like announcements and stuff. And Representative Justin Jones of Nashville, Democrat, immediately, he was, I think, genuinely the second person to speak, said, like, let's have a moment of silence for Renee Good, the woman who was killed in Minneapolis. And probably in response to that, though I don't know, a couple of Republican lawmakers end up, one comments and says, let's have a moment to pray for ICE. And then another one reads a list of people who are victims of crime committed by people who are undocumented. So immediately out of the gate, like very clearly virtue signaling, where are we on ICE and the way other places are responding. But then when the Republicans introduce their suite of legislation that they wrote with the White House, they not only take the time to say we're doing this because Donald J. Trump's the best president ever and he's going to fix immigration and we want to support him and we want to be the model for other states. But then they take the time to target and they threw shade at the other states that are not participating in the Trump agenda toward immigration. So Minnesota is very much at the center of a lot of this, and Tennessee wants to be too, but on the other side.
Yeah, and there were also our first removal of a protester from the chamber this week, wasn't there? Didn't
Four.
they? And
Yeah.
4. There you go.
So during the House, which
do you have a counter going on that? Or
yeah, I have one of those like
someone keeping track of
tickers,
how many
like a
people,
bouncer at a bar. I'm counting who comes
right.
in. No.
How many people get carried out of the House or Senate?
So the state house has really cracked down in recent years, like probably like 4 or 5 years, especially on access to the gallery, which is like the upstairs part where you can watch what's going on, and also floor access for press, but that's separate. And they've been quicker to pull people out and remove them with the troopers. There's like several Tennessee state highway patrolmen who are like in the chambers and will pull you out. Last year, and I don't know the exact rule language around this, so I don't know if there's been a formal change, but last year, anecdotally, from sitting in there was almost always a warning of like, hey, shut up if you like were to scream or hold up a sign or some way act unorderly in the gallery. And then if you had a second offense, you'd get pulled out. And then there are some rules, like once you get pulled out, there's a number of meetings or maybe the whole session, you can't come back to the House. And now they ticket for the House and it's much more formal to get up there, so it's easy to keep people out, I think. This week on Tuesday, Speaker Cameron Sexton 4 times called someone out who had like definitely acted out of order and like shouted at the goings on. And he had troopers immediately remove them. I didn't see anyone get a warning. It was, if I'm correct, it was 4 different individuals pulled out on their first offense on Tuesday, which is like, you know, is it posturing to say, hey, we're not going to put up with that this year? Is it going to be consistently that harsh? I don't know. But it was notable to me, the difference between even last year and this year with how quickly people were removed.
Mm-hmm. And there were also, there was a pretty big protest at a gathering after the session at night, right? One of the, was it a dinner the legislators were having?
Oh, yeah, there's
you were lucky enough to attend that event, I think, but...
Yeah, there was a meeting or like a dinner event at the Tennessee State Museum that's put on every year. It's like a welcome back dinner. And it's pretty much only the Republicans who attend. It's sponsored by like Amazon and CoreCivic. And I don't know, I mean, not very good bouncers. So I just walked in and watched it. They didn't talk much about the session, but it was like a rah-rah kickoff and Marsha Blackburn was there and that kind of thing. But outside of it, there were anywhere from like 60 to 100 people, depending on what point during the event, that were yelling fascist at everyone who walked in and holding up mostly signs related to ICE, but also general protest signs. And then the main event took place in this like glass atrium of the museum.
The pictures. Everyone's in like a fishbowl, and the protesters were outside with their signs, kind of papering the windows of the.
And I saw a video. I missed this in person, but apparently Senator Brent Taylor, who's a Republican out of Memphis, had like a glass of ice that he was shaking at people through the glass who had these anti-ICE signs.
Clever.
And there was like a sign that said the ICE equals new Nazis. There were people like taking pictures laughing in front of it. So it was very much like a visual representation of what it feels like to go to the ledge right now, which is like...
I was going to say, so we're off, the vibes are good to start
Vibes
with.
are great, but it's abject Republican control, and they are deeply unbothered by the very intense frustration and protest of other people.
Right, which, I mean, I take your point that you have to walk around the halls over there, but that's part of why I bring up the supermajority.
Yeah.
So to the extent that anyone listening to us talk about this is less familiar with that, I mean, that they can have that approach because just on a mathematic basis, if all the Republicans are united, no one can really stop them in the legislature. They can't be beaten in a vote. You know, they can pass things through committee. The Democrats could get up and walk out. They could keep passing laws. And so that changes the way that, presumably changes the way that they can interact with people who are protesting there or demonstrating or whatever, because they can't really.
They're not trying to win anybody over except for themselves. Now, the Republicans aren't a monolith. And like that education bill I brought up from last year was a really good example because it squeaked by 5-4 in some committees. Like it was closer. There were Republicans who voted against it. And like, you know, Senator Todd Gardenhire out of Chattanooga, a longtime ally and personal friend of Bo Watson, who's carrying the bill, they were at odds and crying and fighting in committee meetings. Like, it was a narrow thing, and some of this new legislation could end up in that same realm. But there's something about how unified it was all introduced yesterday as one package, and now that it has the like direct line to Trump, it's really hard to imagine that it's going to end up being quite as close.
Yeah, and you would think that might signal that they're optimistic about their legal chances too, that they've maybe got their ducks in a row on how to pass this and be successful if it's challenged legally, if they've run it up the flagpole, so to speak, already.
Yeah, I think some of it came down the flagpole. I think some of it was direct questions
it was
from Trump.
Slid down the flagpole.
Just to be clear, and Sexton wouldn't answer questions about that yesterday, like which ones of these are the Trump's wish list and which ones came from y'all. But I think some of them like are naturally, I mean, one criminalizes the act of being an illegal immigrant and makes a Class A misdemeanor, which means if you've gotten a deportation order from a judge, you can be arrested for the act of just being in Tennessee. That's interesting because, one, immigration is typically a civil issue and doesn't have a criminal thing.
Right.
Two, immigration is not in the state's jurisdiction, so it's weird that we would criminalize that. And it's unprecedented in a way that will probably result in a legal challenge, right? And then you have other stuff like a lot of preemption with local governments in this, where government employees, not even just elected officials like the other two bills we've seen in the last year, but government employees who fail to follow some of the reporting laws are threatened with a Class A misdemeanor. That feels like something that will almost certainly yield a lawsuit. We saw lawsuits over a similar bill that passed in the special session last year targeting only elected officials, let alone employees who are minding their own business. So I think there will be legal challenges. And Jonathan Skrmetti, the Attorney General, he came out this summer or in the fall and said that he wouldn't support the constitutional challenge against the bill last year that targets elected officials because it's a constitutional issue of can you jail somebody for how they vote. So I don't know that it's a...
That's quite a sentence.
Yeah, right. So I don't know that they feel good necessarily about their legal fight, but I do think they're just willing to have it. And I think the motivation is largely to carry water for Trump and to look like the good party that's leading this cause and to be more conservative than Florida or Texas, where they might have also shipped these bills. And so it's like a political value, even if the law never comes to fruition, to get to be the guy who tried to do that for Trump.
Right. And it seems like a lot of things that happen at state legislatures fall into that category. You will have these bills filed sometimes that once you read them, you're like, I think this is already illegal or already legal. Like it's not clear sometimes what the bill is meant to address, but sometimes it's kind of a
virtue signaling.
Well, or it's a vehicle to let them have a public discussion about a thing they want to be seen having a public discussion about.
Yeah.
And that can also happen in our legislature, right? When Democrats file certain bills that, of course, practically speaking, they may know there's not a pathway for it to become law, but it's the issue they want to bring up.
And that's a good segue to the LGBT stuff, because Representative Gino Bolso in Williamson County is like one of the more likely conservatives to bring something on a social issue that is like pretty far to the right, even compared to his own party in Tennessee, and try to like just indicate where he stands on an issue. Specifically, this happens with LGBTQIA issues and with abortion.
Yeah.
And so he's already introduced bills this year that would ban pride flags.
I was going to say, this is the pride flag thing, right?
Yeah.
This is more about public support for gay rights and whether that's okay or not. And
but there's also a discrimination bill that takes gender issues and sexual orientation out of protection against sex-based discrimination. So like you still cannot discriminate against a woman for being a woman, but then there's like you could discriminate against someone for being gay or for being trans or whatever that looked like. And of course in this bill he slipped in that abortion and your interaction with abortion healthcare is not protected. And so this is very much like, I don't think these people should be a protected group in our state, so let's take them out. And it is very much about indicating what he believes about people's personal choices, right?
I wanted to ask you about, because I know there's been discussion, you did some reporting about maybe an effort to try to stir up a legal fight about gay marriage rights. But first, remind me where we landed on cousin marriage. Was that last year? Am I remembering correctly? Or was that 2 years ago? There's been like 4 years that feel like 1 year, but there was quite I think we made some late night TV for this
Cousin
discussion.
marriage was also carried by Gino Bolso and was before I got here. And for that reason, and definitely only that reason, I'm not getting into that.
Fair enough. Okay. We can circle back on that.
Nope.
You won't circle back on
I will not.
I feel like Charlie Rose saying, cousin marriage, you say what? What about gay marriage rights and what the fight that they may be wanting to try to relitigate on that?
I mean, there's not currently a direct challenge to gay marriage that says that Tennessee is going to be the state to bring it to the Supreme Court. But there's been concern, of course, since it was implemented 10 years ago, like that Tennessee and other conservative states are going to look for a way. And right now the court is stacked in such a way where these issues, back to immigration, back to Plyler, whatever, now is kind of a ripe, fertile time if you're a conservative who wants to get one of these fights before the court to try to do that. So every time an anti-gay bill comes in or there's murmurs about it, the LGBTQ community in Tennessee is like, oh no, something that would have been written off a few years ago could raise another Supreme Court case.
Yeah, that makes sense. Quickly, before I will let us go, one thing that I recall you and I having maybe an embarrassing number of conversations about was the bill that banned chemtrails.
Oh my God.
Which we can talk about how you feel about chemtrails, where you are on that issue. I just remember us being pretty fascinated by the discussion around that. And I don't know if we've talked about this, but I had a little experience covering the legislature myself, and there was a bill that was meant to fight Agenda 21. Are you familiar with this? Which was the UN environmental plan, but some folks in Tennessee thought it was like a Trojan horse to create one world government, and so this became a bill at the legislature. I love these things when they come up. What is the chemtrail bill of this year, do you think? Have you seen something that's like
I did not know where that question was going, dude.
Well, that's kind of the thing. We don't know, and you got to keep your head on a swivel.
This year is crazy. I don't think there is one yet, because so far pretty much everything sticks to stuff you would expect. There's been a couple of back to Bolso, he has a Charlie Kirk Act that is about free expression in higher education, which if you put next to the bill that he filed the same day about banning pride flags in state buildings is a really curious free expression place to be. There's some kind of eye roll political stuff like that, but there's nothing quite as neckbeard exciting for you like what I just witnessed as chemtrails, I fear.
Well, to be clear, the chemtrails were banned, so that's not a problem anymore. But I'm just it was something that came up. What do you?
Are we really gonna run this?
We're doing it live.
I have to be here for my job, just for the record.
We're doing it live. Monday is a holiday, and then the legislative session is back. What's next for you next week? Kind of what are you going to be following, and then we can kind of end there. But what's on your agenda next week to keep up with? Well,
bills still come in through January 30th, so they can file new bills. So I'm woefully behind on even just seeing the ones that were filed this week, because as you can imagine, if one little package of them was 8 bills yesterday, there's a couple hundred a week right now, or at least 100. I'm not sure, but there's a ton. And so I need to catch up on what all has been filed. Maybe there's a chemtrail bill in there I can tell you about.
Well, I was going to say, so it sounds like, we will need to circle back.
Lamestream media, I just didn't want you to know about it. And then it'll be watching to see what bills from last year, particularly Lamberth's education bill and that kind of thing, come back. The budget for the state will come out the first week of February. So the state of the state, I think, is February 2nd, and then the full budget February 9th. Sorry if they have to dub me over with AI because I said the wrong dates or something. But we'll have a sense of the budget priorities, which gets us to the voucher stuff. This is Lee's last year in office. It's the first year they could expand vouchers. He sent out a release yesterday bragging about the number of applicants already, which sounds like a case to expand vouchers. But there's been some concern that with the kind of tight budget constraints this year, they won't be able to do that. So it'll be really interesting to see if Republican lawmakers want to spend what little money they have this year on expanding vouchers, or if it just kind of continues at the rate that it did last year.
Right. So once the budget comes out, that will kind of slightly narrow the focus of things, because a lot of the discussion will be about what fits in the budget, what doesn't,
right.
That kind of thing.
If you can't fund it, you can't do it. So then stuff will move through committees and end up in finance, ways and means, and that's when you really start to see what's going to come to fruition and what's not.
Well, I think you're going to have a really fun couple of months, and I'm excited to hear more about it.
Woohoo. Not on this podcast, though.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, you bet.